Hello Internet Allies, how are you doing? So, around 6 months ago I made a video talking about my biggest insecurity being not really having experience in a romantic or sexual relationship, being the age that I am, which is 26. Has my insecurity changed? No. Has anything developed? Also no, unfortunately. I mean, I do think the pandemic has had a lot to do with that. I think the pandemic has made meeting people and dating a lot harder. However, I do think I feel a little bit better about this insecurity, and I do feel like I'm a lot more open talking about my lack of romantic and sexual relationship experience. I think what the nicest thing is that people aren't really that judgmental or put off by this, and it really means a lot that my friends and family have been really supportive about it. I'll honestly say I did think the global pandemic would have been over by now when I did make the video 6 months ago. I really did genuinely want to get myself out there, and I still do. You know, I just wish I knew a way to do it. And when I find that way, there'll be no stopping me. I really hope so, anyway. I really hope I do find my soulmate soon. The love of my life, romantic love. It's something I've really always wanted. I do feel like I am definitely ready for a relationship. It's not really necessarily out of lack of trying, but I think it's just kind of feeling a bit clueless and a bit stuck, really, to be perfectly honest. I'm also autistic, and today what I wanted to do was review a show I watched on Netflix a couple of weeks ago called Love on the Spectrum, which kind of relates to basically how I'm feeling. It's basically about other young people on the spectrum, in their 20s, you know, experiencing dating. I have a lot of thoughts about this show, Love on the Spectrum. Some good, some bad, some in between. Things I liked about the show Love on the Spectrum. So it did help me to feel less alone with my lack of dating experience. It was reassuring that I'm not the only person on the spectrum who does struggle with dating, even though they do want to go out dating and stuff. What I also really liked was that a lot of these autistic people, they did have a great supportive family network. And, you know, they seemed very close to their families, and, you know, they were all accepting the autistic person for who they were, which was great. And, you know, I think that did inspire me to actually talk to my family about me wanting to go out and meet people and start dating. I think my issue is that I don't really know how to accomplish this. Another thing I really liked on the show was the autistic people themselves. You know, you really end up rooting for them. You really hope that they do find, you know, their one true love, their romantic partner that, you know, they've been craving for so long. It's kind of interesting seeing the stories and the journeys they go on and getting to know these autistic people. Even though, yeah, they probably do struggle with the social aspect of things and the communication side of things. Some of them are really talented. So for example, there was one guy who ended up building really intricate things out of Connects, right? And he had a Connects clock tower, a working Connects Ferris wheel in his room. It was amazing. Another one was very artistic. He did a lot of digital art. I think he even ended up making a sort of a dating comic for autistic people in the end, which was pretty cool. Another guy, you know, he was obsessed with dinosaurs, you know, and he could tell you literally anything about dinosaurs. I mean, that's another thing about autism. Basically they just light up basically when they talk about something they're passionate or interested in. One thing I really liked about the autistic people on the show actually was basically when the dates didn't go well, or when, you know, they thought actually this isn't really going anywhere, you know, I think it's probably best to just be friends. I think the autistic people, yeah, they were disappointed, but I think they still ended up taking it quite well. I do applaud them for that. You know, I think anybody putting themselves out there is a great thing, and it can also be quite brave as well. So yeah, so now for the things that I feel like they could have done better. So even though it's great to see representation of autism on TV or in documentaries, I did feel like there was a bit of like a lack of diversity within the autism spectrum. And what I mean by that is that I felt like a lot of the people that were on the show, they were like on kind of a similar level of autism. So I would say, and this is no disrespect to the people on the show at all, but I consider myself to be quite mildly autistic, and I think these people were a bit more profoundly autistic. I think compared to a lot of other autistic people, I do consider myself to have good social skills. I think sometimes I just don't sometimes understand people's motives or actions. So sometimes, you know, I think I do need to work on like my social understanding. And most of the people on the show, the vast majority of them were like straight and white. It would have just been nice to see more people of colour on the show. I mean, it was like a couple of Asian people on the show, but I'd love to have seen more like black people on the show. I would have loved to have seen more representation of like the LGBTQ+ community. I think there was only like one girl that was being focused on who realised that she preferred women. And it would have just been nice to have just seen more like representation of that. However, I do think with the people that they did show, I did think they did a good job. Another thing I would have loved to have seen as well was, on the show, it was really exclusively autistic people dating other autistic people. Now, what I would have loved to have seen was kind of an autistic person going on a date with a non-autistic person, or being in a relationship with a non-autistic person. The reason I say this is because I do think that like autistic people and non-autistic people can learn a lot from each other, and I think they could like learn a lot about like supporting each other as well. I mean, I suppose this is just me. For me, because I am autistic and I know how difficult it can be to live with autism, I think I would prefer like to have a romantic partner who wasn't autistic. However, like, you know, if I did find out that like a romantic partner I had was on the autism spectrum, that would not be a deal breaker for me, because I feel like if I had that mentality that I wouldn't date someone just because they were autistic, then I don't deserve to be in a relationship then, to be honest. And, you know, that'd basically be like saying I don't deserve love and I wouldn't date myself, if that makes sense. And yeah, I don't think that's a great mentality to have. I also think if you kind of only limited like autistic people dating other autistic people, you know, I'd worry if like somebody was to watch that show, not really know a lot about autism, and they'd think that like autistic people only really feel comfortable hanging out with other autistic people. I think it can also be an advantage for an autistic person to have friends on the spectrum, however, as well. Because I do think you can have a bit more of a mutual sort of understanding and empathy for each other. You know that some things can trigger autistic people a lot more intensely than non-autistic people. Another thing I felt like the show could have done better was kind of the gender roles in the show. I felt like in the show, like there was this relationship coach who helped some of the autistic people who did want to get into dating kind of acquire the social skills needed for dating. However, I remember she only ended up visiting men. Also, I remember thinking on the dates, like some of the men were dressed like really smartly, like in, you know, a shirt and tie and everything, and a suit. And then their date, the woman, she just ended up like coming to the date in a denim jacket or a leather jacket and some jeans. And, you know, it kind of made me feel like, you know, the guys were kind of making a lot more of the effort on the date than the women were, and that didn't really sit too right with me, to be perfectly honest. Even with the like whole social cues as well, and the whole social aspect of dating, it was kind of like the guys were asking questions about the women, and then the women were answering the questions, but they weren't really giving anything back to the men. Like, you know, asking the men about themselves or whatever. I mean, this isn't necessarily to say that all the autistic men and women were like this on the show. There was just a couple of them that I saw that I felt this way. And also, I think if one person dressed up really smartly on a date and the other one dressed a bit more casually, like, it's a bit mismatched as well. You know, I think it's just kind of dressing appropriately for whatever date you're on. I do remember this one girl, I think she wanted to end up wearing her like Batgirl costume to a date, but like, you know, her parents had to talk her out of it. I do think some of the people on the show, however, I don't necessarily think they were ready for a relationship. I still think they did need to work a lot more on themselves before they're ready to be in a relationship, and that's perfectly okay. I know I definitely felt this way when I was a teenager, because even though I knew I wanted to be in a relationship, I definitely didn't think I was ready. You know, I think it's hard to pick on like the social cues as to whether or not people like you sometimes and whatnot. You know, it's kind of hard to like read that kind of stuff for me, I think, sometimes. Or to notice when people are like flirting with me or whatever, you know, or whether or not anybody ever has, I don't know. What I didn't really like was that pretty much all these autistic people who went on dates, they basically met their date for the first time at the date. And I feel like, personally for me, I don't necessarily feel like I'd feel particularly comfortable with that, because I think I'd want to basically know the person I'm dating first, know that I can trust them. I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable dating somebody I'd never met in real life before. They also had like weird like B-roll clips at times as well, where like, you know, they would talk about like an autistic person's likes and dislikes. I remember one in particular was something like this one person, they didn't like bananas, right? And the way they showcased this was so strange, it was so weird, and it just made me laugh for ages. So basically what they did, they had somebody holding a banana like a weapon, like in a threatening way, and chasing somebody down a narrow street. It was so weird. Like, I'm just like, yeah, let's just threaten people with bananas, yeah! There was actually a couple of couples that were already in relationships on the show. These couples again were like exclusively like autistic, so both people in the relationship were autistic. I mean, one of them did have a little bit of an awkward interview, I'm not gonna lie. Like, yeah, when the interviewer like kind of asked the couple like basically have they consummated the relationship, and then they had to look at each other and think, what does that mean? And then it kind of clicked what it meant. It kind of come across as a little bit patronizing sometimes, because that question could come across as like, do autistic people like or enjoy having sex or whatever, like, and really, like, you know, it's normal pretty much, like, you know, to enjoy having sex, you know, regardless of whether you're autistic or not, really. Thanks guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't really normally do Netflix reviews, but like, if you enjoyed this video, I might review more Netflix shows or things I watch on Netflix, maybe. I don't know. I have a void that needs filling in this channel. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day, and until next time, keep smiling. Bye bye.